Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Continuing with our summer scouting series as we take a look at this Arkansas Razorbacks team. Dill, this was a team that we were very high on heading into the 2022 season, and quite frankly, just got murdered with injuries. I mean, like you saw guys go down in the secondary, like Jalen Catalon. That group struggled. Obviously, your all SEC quarterback and KJ Jefferson played banged up, struggled with injury as well. If this team can stay healthy, this is a team that can make some noise in the SEC, and I'm excited to get into it because this is a team that's going to look a lot different too. Sam Pittman went to work in the transfer portal. I like some of the additions he made. Now, before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. Again, the summer scouting series is always the best because we get to hear from you guys, learn from you guys. So if you guys do have any takes that we might be sleeping on players, maybe misevaluating some position groups, or just some sleepers that you guys want to shout out, let us know in the comment section. And of course, if you do enjoy the content, you want to support the boys, consider subscribing to the channel. Again, the support has meant a ton to the fellas. Dale, I'm going to kick this one off to you. How are we feeling about this Razorbacks team heading into 2023 here?
I mean, you mentioned it. Last year, I think probably would have been a really good year if they were able to avoid some of those injuries. You said
Yes.
It's like you have a healthy secondary against Texas A&M, and you don't give up some of those big plays. That's a game they probably win. You look at that LSU game. If KJ Jefferson plays that football game, they probably win that. Like, we're talking about a record that would look really, really good with some really big time wins. I mean, those two alone kind of flip the whole narrative on the season. Like you mentioned it, I would imagine if I was an Arkansas fan, I would have been disappointed last year just because you had the talent, you had the team to be better than that. But you gotta like where this team's going, I think.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear from the Razorback fans on the evaluation of Sam Pittman. Like, I'm under the impression he's got this program going in the right direction. I think he's done a really good job there. I'm interested to hear what the Arkansas fans have to say about that. One thing I'll say before we kind of take a deep dive into this roster, I really like what Sam Pittman did in the transfer portal, not only in terms of they added some quality starters, but this team got exposed, and it got exposed in a big way in terms of depth. Like, a few key injuries really derailed this team. And so what do they do in the transfer portal? They go out and get guys that not all, I think they took 19 new players. Not all of them are going to start. That being said, they're quality backups. I mean, at some point, I think Arkansas had a true freshman guy who was supposed to be playing wide receiver have to start at the cornerback spot because they just didn't have anybody. Like, that's from a roster management standpoint, and I know injuries happen, that's inexcusable to have a position where you're just so depleted that that's what you have to come to, because that's not going to fly in the SEC. Now, Dill, diving into this team, we got to start with potentially what is like the best backfield in America with KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders.
In KJ Jefferson, to me, when he's at his peak play, he looks really, really good. The problem with what his game has been at times in his career is when he kind of trails off a little bit, like it can really fall off. And again, I don't want to harken back to that Texas A&M game. Like, parts of that game, he looked so good, and that offense was really cooking. And then there were like other parts of the game where they just couldn't move it, and he was making like really kind of mind-boggling mistakes in bad throws and all that. Man, if he just puts together a consistent, clean season where he's playing kind of close to his peak for the bulk of it, I mean, you mentioned it, the talent's all there, the ability to run that the way he does, the accuracy, the throwing, it's all there. It's just, can he put together a whole year of playing up to his potential?
100% agree. And I think some of that does have to deal with, he's been banged up a lot in his career.
He plays like a physical game too.
Yeah, he's basically a linebacker out there running the football. And I think at some points, he probably shouldn't have been playing. Arkansas just was in such a bad spot in terms of quarterback behind him. I will shout out Jacoby Griswold and Singleton, the true freshman. Those guys are going to add some quality depth. If KJ Jefferson does need to miss a series, Jacoby Griswold, who again is a quality player, he lost a quarterback competition to Drake May, which was a tightly contested quarterback battle throughout camp. I think Jacoby Griswold can play, but I think the offense, and if it really takes some strides, it's going to run through Rocket Sanders, who, Dill, right now, getting this 2024 NFL draft board together, I don't know if there's a running back in the country I'm higher on than Rocket Sanders in terms of the size, the straight line speed, the explosiveness that he's bringing to the table.
I mean, he's criminally underrated in my mind in terms of like when you talk about best running backs in the game. If you're not talking about Raheem Sanders or Rocky Sanders, you're missing it. I mean, you look last year. I thought a guy who can kind of make wine out of water.
Wine
he can
make wine out of water.
But he was able to like do that type of thing. It's like when he'd get bottled up in the backfield, the ability to cut back and make something happen. I just think is special. And frankly, the elusiveness, the speed, the burst, it's just all there. I think, again, we talk about Corum and Travion Henderson and some of these other guys. If you're not talking about him as the best in the game, you got to start watching some Arkansas ball.
You got to start watching some Razorbacks football. And the offensive line, like you lose some guys, but you do return a lot of really good players. Brady Latham, Bo Limmer. You go out and get Josh Braun from Florida, who's played a lot. That taxes in a Sam Pittman offensive line being solid. I'm pretty confident in that. And so the only question I have, like KJ Jefferson, can you put together?
And that's frankly the fun part about what he's done, Sam Pittman, is he's like taken that identity. He's an offensive line guy, and he's put together a unit that's been good year in and year out. And has kind of been the staple of the football team. Like they can always run the football. They always have really good players. And you're right. They did lose some guys, but bringing Josh Braun back and getting Latham and Limmer back, I don't see why you wouldn't think this unit's going to be really good. It's just been that way since Pittman's been there. It's his calling card, and he's established his identity, which is important for some of these coaches who you just look at. You're like, well, who are you? What are you trying to do with the football program?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good point. Like that identity is going to be a physical team on the trenches, and they're going to want to run the football.
It doesn't hurt having KJ Jefferson who can. I mean, that's just a guy who can beat teams up too. So it's just top to bottom. It's physical, and then you add the explosiveness of Raheem Sanders. I just think you have a really good unit. At least in that portion.
The one question I have is the wide receiver room. This is where I'm asking the Razorback fans to maybe in the comment section help us fill this out. Like last year, they went heavy in the transfer portal, and I'm not right on much. I'll be honest with that. I'm not a told you so guy. I was in on Matt Landers last year. He had a really good season. Jaden Hazelwood, they relied on the transfer portal last year. It worked out pretty good. Like both those guys are on NFL rosters now. This year, like you have a little less to work on though, because like man, Jaden Hazelwood, former 5-star coming from Oklahoma. This year they go to like the D2 level, I believe, in Isaac Tesla. You go get Andrew Armstrong. You go get Tyrone Broden from Bowling Green. It's a little less to go on. And for the Arkansas fans, and this is the one question mark you have on this team is who's stepping up at that wide receiver spot? Do we have any young names that we should be looking for? Are these guys in the transfer portal? When I watched the spring game, some of the guys in the transfer portal were getting some action. Like who's stepping up is probably my biggest question at that wide receiver spot for this whole offense.
And I mean, the one thing you kind of, I think, looking for is can they stretch the field? And that's obviously what they kind of went with. Big, athletic guys, especially you see why, again, he was playing at that D2 level, but that size and that athleticism, that's pretty much what it looked like Pittman was going for. It's like, are they just trying to get guys who can kind of open this field up so they can do what they want to do, which is just run KJ Jefferson, Raheem Sanders, and frankly, if Griswold's got to come in, he does that too. So I think obviously this team's going to run from the inside out, if you will.
Yep.
But if these wide receivers can kind of use that athleticism in the big frames and all that to keep teams honest and make them play not like 8-man boxes, that's probably what you're kind of looking for out of this wide receiver group. Because again, I don't think you have a bunch of probably don't have the same level of talent you had last year.
And Sam Pittman has a type. Like he went out and got some big wide receivers who can work vertically. Like a funny little, and I'll only go 20 seconds here on Isaac Tesla. Apparently a guy out of high school was like a quarterback in like a wing T offense and just kind of got overlooked. And you might be like looking at like kind of a really freaky athlete. One guy, and I should have said pass catchers. Because one guy we do know a little bit about, Varkey's Guns, coming from North Texas, was one of the most productive tight ends in the country last year. I am very excited about him. I think he's probably the best pass catcher on the team right now. Arkansas likes to use their tight ends. Trey Knox was obviously very effective for Arkansas last year. Maybe he's a guy that steps up, but I would love to hear from Arkansas fans in terms of this offense on who's stepping up on the offense side of the ball at that pass catcher position. Now, Dill, looking at the defense, I like what they have up front at the defensive line. A guy like Landon Jackson, I hope this is his coming out party. Obviously, the transfer from LSU a couple of years ago. You go out and got a guy in Trajan Jeffcoat who played some really good football from Missouri as well. Like I think this front seven, because you could add these linebackers, it's a pretty solid group.
And Jeffcoat's got like the look of a real like
yes, he does.
I mean, he's that long, athletic guy. Like he just looks like he's kind of primed to break out. And again, we'll see. I thought he'd play really good football at Mizzou for that matter. What I'm most excited about is adding some beef in the middle, though. I think obviously you're going to get Torian Carter back, who missed pretty much the whole season last year. But adding a guy like Anthony Booker, again, they just felt like a little bit small in that middle to play the way they wanted to, which is 3 down linemen and kind of play athletic with the linebackers. I think a guy like Anthony Booker can help them and just be a little tougher in the run and kind of keep everyone else free, because that's kind of how they want to play. They want their linebackers and DNs, I feel like, to play with freedom and run and do what they do, playing that like 3-3-5 sort of look. I think having a tough nose is going to be huge for them.
Yeah, and at the linebacker spot, on paper, like it's hard to say it gets better. Like Drew Sanders was phenomenal. Bumper Pool was a stalwart for Arkansas on the defense on that linebacker group. They go on to get in the transfer. For one, Chris Paul Jr. can play. Like he had to play a lot last year. Duke can play some football. Antonio Greer coming from USF, and then Jaheim Thomas. I like his build coming from Cincinnati. I'm not saying this linebacker group is going to be better than it was last year, because you are missing some legitimate studs. Like we were very high on Drew Sanders last year for this NFL draft. But Dale, I don't think you're going to see the biggest drop off. I think the biggest part where I'm optimistic about this defense is what they did in the secondary, because that was the most glaring concern for the Razorbacks last year. You go out and get Leonardo Johnson and Al Walcott from Baylor, both guys who are proven players at the Power 5 level. You have Dwight McGlothern coming back, who might be we're talking about an NFL cornerback there. And then Jaheim Singletary, former 5-star from Georgia, didn't play much as a true freshman, but checks off all the boxes physically. And at the very least, adding some depth so you don't have to play a true freshman wide receiver at that cornerback spot. This secondary could be much, much better than we saw last year. It has to be.
Like when you talk about like using the transfer portal, that's why like you love kind of what Arkansas did. It's like they knew the place where they were thin and they struggled, and that was pretty much the entire secondary. You go get those 2 guys from Baylor. Those 2 can play. Al Walcott, I think, is really, really good. You go get a guy who's just ultra talented in Jaheim Singletary. And now you're right. At the very least, you have depth. At the best, you have 2 like rock-solid corners in McGlothern and Singletary, and then just good players around them in that safety nickelback kind of role, which, frankly, they just didn't have at all last year. It was chaos. Like they just couldn't stop giving up deep plays, and I just don't see how that happens anymore this year because of what they were able to do in the portal.
Yeah, the worst part is like teams knew it, and teams would identify and just go pick on the guys who just – and again, it's not – I don't mean to be mean, but like some of the guys Arkansas was trotting out in the secondary last year just weren't ready for SEC football, and they were getting picked on in a big way. Taking a look at this schedule, I mean, I think you start 3-0. You got BYU, Kent State, Western Carolina. Those should be wins. BYU, I think Arkansas can take care of business there. And you go on the road at LSU. It's hard to chalk up a win, but this Arkansas team, and I don't want to go like game by game and pick winners and losers. All I'm going to say with this Arkansas ball club is that if KJ Jefferson could we're talking about potentially the best quarterback in the SEC here. If he can play at that level and you can run the football with Rocket Sanders behind a really good offensive line, this is an Arkansas Razorbacks team that not a lot of teams in the SEC are going to want to play.
And they've just been tough for a while. Like you don't see a ton of blowouts anymore out of Arkansas. And yeah, you sprinkle a few, like maybe Alabama will get them once in a while. But this is a team that just plays people tough now. It's not like what it was a couple of years ago before the arrival of Sam Pittman. They're always respectable. They're always on the field. I mean, who's to say, again, like would I be picking them necessarily to beat teams like LSU, Bama?
Those are the only 2 that I'm really picking to lose.
That's probably true. I started to rattle it off, and then I'm like, wait, who else should beat them? Maybe A&M, but I'm not picking A&M.
That's the thing. You have some toss-ups. I think on the road at LSU and on the road at Alabama, I'm not going to sit up here and say, like, I'm picking Arkansas to go on the road and win those. But outside of those, like, I like the games you get at home. You get the Aggies at home. You get Auburn at home. You get Missouri at home. I think going on the road to Florida, that's a very winnable game. Going on the road to Ole Miss, that's a very winnable game. So
because they don't have a brutal section from the SEC East.
No.
It's like missing out on Tennessee and Georgia and South Carolina, frankly. So you do have some more winnable games out of
threw in Scar there.
I probably thrown in Scar with those two, but whatever. I'm a Beamer guy, but you have winnable games out of that side of the division for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is on the road at LSU and Bama are the only two games that I'm like, okay, Arkansas, like we'll see what you have. Outside of those, like this is a very gettable schedule. I mean, like 9-3, 8-4, I think is very realistic number. And Arkansas is getting it done on the recruiting trail in 2024. This is a team that I think really is going in the right direction. I'm excited to watch this team in 2023 again. Appreciate you guys for checking out the fellas. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate you guys rocking with the boys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.